The fact that the opening track, Breaking Into Heaven, lasted over 11 minutes indicated that the Stone Roses now wanted more than to be adored. They wanted respect as serious musicians. They were definitely demonstrating a wider musical range than shown on the first album, with the ballads 10-Story Love Song and Your Star Will Shine contrasting nicely with the strutting Begging You. Apart from Led Zeppelin, the influences came thick and fast as the songs borrowed sonic and lyrical snippets from The Who and Guns N' Roses, and entire song titles from John Lennon, the first to record a song called How Do You Sleep, and Chic with the definitive Good Times. A hidden untitled track known to insiders as The Foz was supposedly a piss take of Primal Scream's Screamadelica album. Ominously, John Squire refused to get involved in such childishness. The critics were underwhelmed by the album and then began to get annoyed by the Roses' behaviour. The attempt to bring Peter Grant into the fold hinted at some kind of megalomania, and when the band announced they would give only one interview and that it would be with The Big Issue, the weekly magazine distributed by London's homeless, it looked as if endearing confidence and eccentricity had given way to deluded weirdness. Inevitably, the music world had moved on in the last 5 years. The word on the streets was Britpop, and amongst its promising exponents were another bunch of obnoxious Manx, Oasis. The band's frontman Liam Gallagher had been inspired to become a rock and roll star after witnessing Ian Brown's charismatic insolence at a Roses gig. The Stone Roses' influence on many of the new bands was clear, but that just reinforced the fact that they were yesterday's story. Unsurprisingly, under the pressure of spiralling egos and unfulfilled expectations, not to mention serious quantities of controlled substances, the Stone Roses were falling apart at the seams.
Strange thing was, we started the rehearsal and I couldn't flip remember the lyrics to My Star. Shit, I'm gonna have to get a copy and write them out. But the Roses, it all just come out in one go. As soon as that kid started playing the guitar, it all just come out. All the lyrics, the voice that I sung it in, where to stop, where the arrangement, you know, all just come out in one.
After the disappointing reception given to The Second Coming, January began on a positive note. A UK tour was arranged for March. The Roses were invited to headline at the Glastonbury Festival, and there were plans for them to take part in the Lollapalooza Festival in North America later in the year. The UK tour was cancelled when John Squire succumbed to a mysterious respiratory ailment, variously described as pneumonia and pleurisy. Then, more seriously, it was announced that Rennie had left the band after a series of disagreements with his bandmates. Rennie had been an integral part of the Stone Roses for over a decade, and his funky syncopations were among the factors that distinguished the band from any number of other indie guitar outfits. His replacement was announced as Robbie Maddox, who had played with the likes of Terence Trent D'Arby and Rebel MC. With the new tub thumper in place, the band finally made it back on the road with a low-key gig in, of all places, Oslo. They played a few more dates in Scandinavia, and reports trickled back to London of on and off stage tensions, occasional guitar smashing and problems with Ian Brown's voice, never the hardiest throat in show business. To add to the problems, Brown was in the process of splitting up from his girlfriend, the mother of his sons. Gigs in North America were more successful. Then matters descended into farce when John Squire fell off a mountain bike and broke his collarbone, ruining plans for a Japanese tour. The band's appearance at Glastonbury was also cancelled, and their place was taken by perennial also-rans Pulp, who finally assured their position in the rock and roll stratosphere with an epochal performance. Once Squire had recovered, the Roses embarked on tours of Australia and the UK, culminating in a triumphant gig at Wembley Arena, supported by the Manic Street Preachers. In the eyes of some fans, this was the last time the Stone Roses, the authentic Stone Roses, played together. On March the 25th, 1996, it was announced that John Squire had walked out of the band he'd created. Apparently, he'd been dreading going back into the recording studio and was also upset at Rennie's absence. The departure of the Roses' founder and key songwriter was a major blow, and many people began to prepare for the band's obituaries. As one journalist put it, losing Rennie was like losing a limb, but losing Squire is tantamount to taking away their entire upper body. Nevertheless, the remaining members put on a brave face. They were scheduled to perform at the Reading Festival in August, and shortly before it was announced that Aziz Ibrahim, formerly of Simply Red, would attempt the impossible, filling the shoes of John Squire. Nigel Ippinson, who had previously worked with orchestral manoeuvres in the dark and had played keyboards for the Stone Roses for some months, was now a permanent member. Although permanent didn't mean much, the Roses' performance at Reading 1996 has gone down in history as one of the lamest in the annals of rock. Most criticism was focused on Ian Brown, whose singing was horribly flat even by his own variable standards. Some observers blamed the band's hanger-on Cressor for encouraging him to overdo the herbal relaxants before going on stage. A tacky 70s-style go-go dancer added a new level of sleaze, and Robbie Maddox confounded the agony by behaving like a third-rate club DJ and asking the crowd to put their hands in the air. In truth, it was the band that should have surrendered. In October, they did. Ian Brown announced, having spent the last 10 years in the filthiest business in the universe, it's a pleasure to announce the end of the Stone Roses. The shimmering dream was over.
He's a brilliant musician though. I don't think people realise what a great musician he is. Today he's come out with something saying if it weren't for the Roses I'd probably have ended up as a goth. When they first came out, a lot of bands was into the Roses but they tried to hide it, but they came straight out.
As the Roses began to disintegrate, Manny was quoted as saying that there were only 3 bands for whom he'd forsake the Beastie Boys. The Beastie Boys, the Jesus and Mary Chain and Primal Scream. Scream leader Bobby Gillespie took the hint and offered him the vacant bass spot. Manny took it. The switch had more than a tinge of irony about it. Not only had Made of Stone been a shameless Xerox of a Primal Scream B-side, but the Scream's reinvention as dance rock titans owed more than a little to the merging of genres that the Roses had pioneered. John Squire, meanwhile, had been organising a band of his own. The Seahorses, fronted by the previously unknown Chris Helm, released an album, Do It Yourself, in 1997. But the reaction from critics was lukewarm, although the fans remained loyal, perhaps hoping to pick up by osmosis some final droplets of 1989-style euphoria. Much attention was focused on the fact that The Seahorses was in fact an anagram of He Hates Roses. In truth, the songs were tired, second-rate Britpop released at a stage when Britpop itself was dying on its arse. After the band folded in 1998, there was an abortive attempt at forming an indie rock supergroup with members of The Verve, then Squire solo albums in 2002 and 2004. Titles such as I Miss You hinted at a desire to patch things up with Ian Brown, but the chances of a reunion seemed remote. Although as the singer Ian Brown had been the most visible face of the Roses, his musical talents had never been taken seriously, especially when compared with the instrumental virtuosity of Squire and Rennie. The debacle at Reading in 1996 had simply compounded the perception that his success depended on charisma and attitude rather than talent. Without a job or a record contract, Brown pulled himself together and practiced his instrumental skills for a few months. With the help of most of the ex-Roses, with the notable exception of John Squire, he put together some rough tracks in a studio that he'd hired with his own money and negotiated an album deal with Polydor on the understanding that the songs would be released in their original lo-fi form. The curtain-raising single was My Star, which made the UK top 10 in January 1998. Brown appeared to have a better feel for what the fans wanted than his former colleague demonstrated. The single hinted more than a little at the jangle pop winsomeness shown on Made of Stone. The album that followed shortly after was called Unfinished Monkey Business, a jokey reference to the urban myth that Brown insisted on being referred to as King Monkey, and indeed the cover portrait did indeed make him look distinctly simian. The echoes of classic-era roses continued on Can't See Me, featuring Rennie and Manny, which took up where the funk of Fool's Gold left off. Elsewhere though, Brown's taste for reggae and the low-tech manner in which the album was put together left a more lasting impression. The two-part What Happened to You seemed to be a barrage of disappointment aimed at Squire. I saw you running to your own secret place, sang Brown, left to sail the ship alone. Another elliptical nod to the past came with the title of the expressionistic opening track, Under the Paving Stones, The Beach. The phrase was a motto of the political and literary movement, the Situationist International, and it was associated with the Paris Uprising of May 1968, just like the lemons on the cover of the first Roses album. The positive reviews and healthy sales for Unfinished Monkey Business were rather overshadowed by non-musical events. On February the 13th, Brown was flying from Paris to Manchester when he became involved in the kind of incident that had recently been labelled air rage. According to some of the more lurid reports, he had threatened to cut off the hands of an air hostess, and he was arrested once the plane touched down. Brown's behaviour could no longer be excused as cheeky attitude. This was just thuggery. Combined with the fallout from an earlier interview when he had ranted incoherently about homosexuality being responsible for Nazism, it seemed as if the poster boy for the second summer of love was now happy to emulate his own most fervent disciple, Liam Gallagher. But this was more than a case of bad publicity. After a summer of festival appearances, Brown was sentenced in October to 4 months in Strangeways as prisoner BE9311. And although he didn't serve his full term, the weeks inside certainly disrupted the momentum of a solo career that was looking more promising than anyone might have hoped. He later claimed that he made things a little easier by professing to have converted to Islam so he could get access to better food. He kept out of trouble, read voraciously and did hundreds of sit-ups every day. In his own words, he left jail with a 19-pack. John Squire made a rare gesture of support, sending him the customary box of Maltesers with the simple note, "I still love you." Another consolation was the loyalty of his die-hard fans. A free Ian Brown graffito near the M13 in Manchester remains there to this day. To add insult to injury, he received a lifetime ban from British Airways, although he continued to receive statements about his air miles for many years. Album number 2 would have to be special if Brown was to recover the popular goodwill he'd lost.
She's got me into the Mexican mariachi. You know, one of the beautiful things about Mexico, someone could be a punk rocker, they could be into acid house music, they could be into whatever, but they've all got the traditional music. You know, you look through the record collections, they might have everything, the Pistols, the Smiths, all got traditional Mexican music, the romantic shit and the horns, the mariachi.